Andrew Smith, what is your favourite game?
My favourite game is The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. So, a bit of seemingly pointless family history. My dad's mum was originally from Switzerland, and she came over and married a farmer, and blah-de-blah-de-blah. A few years later, I was born, and we occasionally, very, very occasionally, I think twice when I was very young, went to Switzerland for a holiday. And my first memory of video games is still, it's the thing that. It's the moment that I got caught in the magic of video games, and it was in a hotel. There was a games room. I remember it as being this cavernous space, but I was only like 5, so it was probably quite small. I remember the light streaming through the windows. I remember it being this very sort of empty and quiet sort of room, except for this weird beeping. And obviously they had table tennis and pool or whatever. But the thing that I really remember is this strange gobble sort of wacka 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 noise. And for anyone who knows video games, they know that's Pac-Man. And it enchanted me. Like I never played it. I didn't have any coins to put in. I was probably too young to even figure out what to do if I could. But it was a coffee table version, and I remember sort of that was how short I was. I was sort of leaning over it, with my hands up and my chin on it, and just watching this the sort of the attract sequence, if you like. And that's the thing that. Even to this day, I remember. Probably my memory has sort of made it a bit more glamorous than it really was, But that was the first time I ever saw a video game, and it's the first time I was sort of caught up in what they can do. You move forward a few years, and neighbours having video game consoles that I didn't have, and playing games on them, and eventually, saving up to buy my own through the years. Started with the Commodore 64, and then the SNES. I got the Commodore 64 when the sort of NES was actually being sort of phased out, funnily enough, so I was quite late to the game.
What was your first game for the Commodore?
Oh, wow, first game. That's a good question. I think it was Cabal. Or that's the one that sticks in my head, and New Zealand Story as well, which was a cute little platformer, but they were kind of opposite ends. So New Zealand Story, a little kind of Nintendo-esque platformer, side-scroller thing, where you play a little Kiwi chick. Very adorable, great theme tune. And then Cabal was basically like an unlicensed Rambo game, where it was a single screen and you'd run your guy left to right. It wouldn't scroll, but you'd have bad guys in the centre, and you'd sort of shoot towards them, and they'd shoot out towards you, and you'd sort of dodge and roll and things like that. I remember Salamander as well, which I think was like a Konami sort of sequel to Gradius or something like that back in the day. So these are all on tape decks and things. But yeah, I enjoyed that a lot. And it turns out my parents had bought like a second-hand one with a ton, like hundreds of games in some deal, and sort of basically rationed them out over Christmases and holidays and things like that. And then eventually I saved up, got my SNES with Donkey Kong Country, blew my mind. And then again, you kind of skip forward a little bit to when I bought a PC for the first time, and Half-Life was the game that I got a PC for, essentially. Yeah. Again, sort of seminal moment. I mean, previous to that, N64 and Console Boy all the way. Like GoldenEye, Mario 64, absolutely incredible. But Half-Life's the one that told a story that involved me in a world, in a way that I hadn't been before. And because of the mod tools, actually sort of relating to your original question, they're kind of the start of me making video games. It was originally things like levels, and me and a friend of mine who's actually in the industry, a guy called Steve Hatchard, shout out to him if he listens, we used to go to school together. We would go around each other's houses, and we'd spend evenings or weekends basically making a level to be played by the other person in single player using the editor in Half-Life. And we'd sort of, it's almost past the pad but past the editor,
That's an interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny the things you get fun out of. But yeah, we'd have like the other person while one of us was making it, the other person would be playing like GoldenEye or something on the N64, or watching some terrible Bruce Lee movie or whatever. But yeah, there was good times, and I moved on from there to sort of making my own levels, to making levels for mods, and making weapon models in 3D programs, things like that. And that's what really sort of caught my imagination, on terms of I could do this for a job. Like, this is when I began to find out that people get paid to make games, and I'm making games kind of, but in my bedroom, and hey, maybe the two can be linked up. So yeah.
Which segues in nicely into how you got into the industry.
So I went to Abertay University up in Dundee, did a computer arts course. The summer before I started that, I was lucky enough to get a sort of a friend of a friend's secretary was married to someone who was in QA at I'm going to forget, Hasbro Interactive. Right. This was when they had the Atari license, and they doing things like Pong on the PlayStation 1, and the next Tetris, I think, was another one. And yeah, I got like a week's summer placement sort of thing, working there. And then the guy who was our contact, he lived nearby. I used to carpool with him. He moved to Acclaim. So during the first summer at uni, when I was back at home, I got to do QA for Acclaim in Cheltenham. So we were working on things like Extreme G3 on the PS2. Did a tiny bit of work on some of the Sega ports that they did from the Dreamcast. So a tiny bit of work on Crazy Taxi. Don't think I was ever credited, but there you go.
No Burnout. Not
no Burnout. Sadly, no. That was a shame. I know. I think they were working on that afterwards.
Okay.
But yeah, so and a bit of Shadow Man 2, I think it was as well at one point. But anyway, that sort of gives you an idea of roughly sort of brilliant it was. And from there, I finished my degree and sort of stayed in touch. And I think that my degree combined with my history in modding, which I carried on through uni, me and a few flatmates and course mates, we sort of made a little mod for Half-Life again, a deathmatch mod called Mini Mod, which was, we described it as micro machines for deathmatch. So you're all toys running around in, a giant kitchen or a giant garage or whatever. And most of us are actually in the industry now, which is quite funny. So those things combined, and with my little bit of QA experience, I got a level design job, a junior, I should say, level design job at Visual Science up in Dundee. They used to do a lot of work with EA before they went under. I was there for about 2 years before the sad day came, but worked on primarily, unfortunately, an unshipped racing game that was many things, but at the time that it all stopped was the Hot Import Knights licensed sort of competitor to Need for Speed, which is obviously on the PS2, was experiencing a bit of a resurgence. After Visual went under, I went and did a stint at Real Time Worlds, and then at Proper Games. So I did do 3.5 months on APB, which I think most people have heard of.
Nope, I've never heard of such a game in all my life. No.
Famous for many reasons, I think, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. Unfortunately, that was a huge company. They worked very, very much in a way that was, sort of. I'm very much exaggerating for sort of ease of understanding, but like cog in a machine kind of stuff. They had, and that did not suit me. So I kind of I left. I was offered a job at Proper Games, who were founded out of the ashes of Visual Science, a bunch of my sort of colleagues and friends, and we worked on a bunch of games for Capcom during my time there. So we did Flock on XBLA and PSN and PC.
Yeah, I remember that.
Abducting sheep and cows and things like that.
All I remember from that game, I think, was or maybe I'm thinking of Age of Booty, Giant Bomb video with Jeff Gerstmann and Adam Boyce from Sony. Or maybe I'm thinking of Age of Booty. I don't know.
It might have been Age of Booty because that was roughly at the same time. But Adam was now he's like bigwig at Sony, isn't he?
Yeah.
But
he was at Capcom at the time.
Yeah, he was producer there. Yeah. Good times. We had some fun with those guys. So we did Flock, and I was designer on that. Obviously, I was still fairly sort of inexperienced in the industry at that time. I only had sort of 3 years under my belt, but it was a small company. I think there was 12 of us working on Flock at that time, so I was like the designer by default. I had a creative and design lead above me, who's one of the senior guys, but I was sort of stuck there making all the levels myself, which was good fun, although one of the artists very kindly jumped in and helped on some of the co-op stuff, so that was good. I actually pitched that game to Adam Boyes, funnily enough, at Leipzig GDCE or whatever it's called these days, before it moved to Cologne.
Yeah, so Games Convention around that time. Yeah.
That was it, yeah, Gamescom, that was it, yeah.
No, it wasn't because Leipzig was Games Convention, and after they moved to Cologne, it was Gamescom.
I see, there you go. That's why I always get confused. That and all the drinking, I imagine. But so that's like me and Adam go quite a way back in terms of that. So I remember sort of the moment that I sort of met him for the first time, not knowing who the hell he was. We were literally in the business area and we were sort of just pitching these games. We had 3 prototypes. We had like a space shooter, an on-rails shooter, and Flock. We sort of pitched all 3 and managed to secure it with Capcom. And then like a year and a half later, we shipped it. And then we worked with them on the Final Fight Double Impact release on XBLA as well and PSN. So that had Final Fight and Magic Sword in a sort of double pack. CPS 1, I think, arcade titles that we basically wrote the emulator for and came up with all the sort of the nice ways that we treated it. So sort of there was like it rendered if you wanted it to on a sort of a modelled arcade cabinet. So it had that sort of CRT curve to it, and you could switch all the scan lines on and off and all this kind of stuff. So we're all massive fans of Capcom and particularly Final Fight. So it was a real honour to work on that. But after that, I kind of hit that point again where I was just like, I don't want to work for other people. Combined with the fact that I was spent 9 years of my life in Dundee, and I was like, there's more to life than Dundee. Particularly, I wanted to move to London, and I come from Essex, not far from London, and I decided I'd move home and start a business. So that I basically ticked off the 2 things that were bugging me about my life at the time. And so I started Spilt Milk Studios, and that was 4 and a bit years ago. I guess it's nearly 5 in March. That's kind of terrifying.
Wow.
Or is it 4? I can never remember. It's been good though. I mean, a mix of original stuff, work for hire, and sort of contract work for other companies.
Talk about the stuff that Spilt Milk has made in the past couple of years, pre-Tango.
So pre-Tango, the first thing we did was we looked at mobile because it was supposedly really easy to make games for, and I wanted to make more than a game every year, which was sort of the norm. And my accountancy firm, funnily enough, the ones that I signed up with called Crunch, they wanted a game, so I made them a game, and that was the first thing. It was kind of like a maths-based sort of block clearing puzzler, which is it's free on iPhone or whatever. Then I worked with a guy called Nickel Hunt, and we co-created a sort of a modern update of Snake called Hard Lines, which I think went down very well. And then I started a couple more projects that sort of got to various degrees of completion and have all been sort of, for various reasons, put on hold. The most recent one was actually about a week from release before we signed Tango Fiesta. Now, up to that point, I'd been working, on sort of some people would be like a rev share, some people would be paid out of my savings. It was all very much sort of spare timey kind of stuff. But as soon as we signed Tango Fiesta, it was like, well, hang on, there's 4 of us being paid to do this as a full-time job. We should really stop doing all the freebie stuff. So I think I started 3 games in the intervening sort of 2.5 years, and none of them came out, which is a point of some sort of annoyance for myself, just professional pride. But, in that time I was doing a lot of contracting work and things like that. You've got to run a business, you've got to keep it alive however you can. But as soon as Tango came along, we were just like, yeah, this is fantastic. And I mean, we did some jam stuff. So I say we, I'm the only sort of technical employee still, but I work a lot with a guy called Andrew Roper, who's a wonderful coder. And we did a lot of stuff as a festival of games in Nottingham called Game City, which is absolutely fantastic. And we've done a little bit of work for them. And we did a virtual Oculus Rift co-op game called Tomb, where you were stuck in a labyrinth and had to get out. And we also did a game about hugging called Huggatron, obviously, which was for a bit of All Right, which is a very indie little games festival in here in London. But both of which, they might amount to something. Huggatron is probably genuinely a week's work away from being finished. So I think we'll probably do that at some point this year, but who knows?
Let's get into your favourite game, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. So you'd mentioned beforehand you had your NES and your SNES as a kid, but how did you get into the series beforehand? Was A Link to the Past your first foray into the series?
So personally, as a player, yes. As a spectator, no. I mentioned some neighbour. One of my neighbours back then had a NES and got quite a lot of the early games, especially the Nintendo ones for it. And I remember sort of watching him play Zelda 1 and 2, I believe he had, throughout the life of that. And I mean, it wasn't like I wasn't allowed to play, but I'd just rather not at that time. I was happy to just watch this adventure, and it was also they're both incredibly hard. I don't know if you've played them recently, but they're both very.
I've never played them at all. To be fair, I'm an early '90s kid. My first console was not a Nintendo system, or well, it kind of was with a Game Boy, but my first home system was a PlayStation.
Yeah,
so
the big one was a PlayStation.
Yeah.
I see. Yeah, so even in that intervening time, games just got a lot more sort of, I don't know about forgiving, just a bit more friendly on sort of, the first Zelda just didn't really tell you anything, and the translation in the West was terrible, and it's quite famous for being very, very difficult, very, very different to how Zelda is these days. Some people would say they're a bit over-tutorialized and over-handheld these days. But, so 1 and 2 I'd seen being played and I was aware of. And I think, the cartoon was on telly at the time. I have memories of that. Or maybe just VHS tapes or whatever. That's how far back we're going. Oh, my God. I just feel
proper
old
retro.
Now. Yeah, proper retro. And so Legend of Zelda I didn't buy for my SNES until after the N64 came out. I think actually the first time I bought it to play and to own was at university. So we're talking really after the Dreamcast was out, and the GameCube was sort of on the horizon. The reason being, obviously I came to the SNES late. So Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past was released in '92 in Europe.
Yeah,
and I got my SNES when Donkey Kong Country was released. So we're talking 94.
Yeah.
So it's 2 years late. And by that time, there were tons of games out, and I was like, right, what am I getting? So Donkey Kong Country was there, and Secret of Mana was another, it was more recent than Zelda. So along with Super Mario World, Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past I didn't own for the longest time. But I knew how good it was supposed to be. I'd seen all the reviews and the screenshots in the magazines, and I mean, this was in a time when, there quite literally wasn't an internet, which is just this most strange thing to say. And so, we just obsess over these screenshots. Every month, you'd buy a magazine, and you would have however many pages devoted to the one game that you really, really cared about, and that was all you had to look at for the month and talk about with your friends, and it grew this sort of obsession, what else was it going to do? It's really peculiar.
Yeah, I can only imagine, especially now where we have this kind of information so easily accessible.
Yeah. Yeah, nowadays I have to make an effort not to spoil things, because if I want to, I can just see everything about a game,
Yeah, because I can just walk up to you and say, Ares died in Final Fantasy. It's just easy like that.
And you know what? I didn't even care. That's great.
How did you find A Link to the Past in terms of gameplay? Because you mentioned yourself, it was very difficult to play.
It was. I think that it's one of the first times. So Nintendo and their home consoles, they had the NES before this. That was their first sort of real home console, and it was the first sort of machine outside of the arcades that their in-house teams had really been let loose on. And you see a progression in Zelda 1 is just the first adventure game that almost it was very there were very few at all in the games industry, let alone from Nintendo. And 2 was an interesting sort of twist on it in a way, the side-scrolling bits. And 3 was along with Super Mario World, where you see that sort of evolution along the Mario sort of gameplay lines. The third Zelda was just this massive jump in terms of like the richness of the world, the amount of information they gave you, the amount of mechanics they presented to you, but it was also it's sort of a perfect distillation of how to introduce them to a player in a way that they, you're not just throwing text boxes at them of how to use things, but you are letting them experiment and learn through play. And that is actually something that Nintendo have become sort of criticized for. I think that this Zelda laid down the template that all subsequent Zeldas have imitated. It's one that Super Metroid also shares, funnily enough. You get to an area, you battle through it at a slight disadvantage, then you find an item that makes what you just did a lot easier, and then you explore the various ways you're essentially forced to. There are sort of gates that kind of come down that metaphorically sort of block you from progressing until you master one of the nuances of a new item or a new weapon or whatever. And then as you progress further and further and have more of them under your belt, they combine them in interesting ways and start making you think outside of the box. And some things are secrets that maybe you miss, because you don't think that, I should blow up that wall, or that particular bunch of flowers is arranged in a slightly more geometric pattern than the normal sort of random stuff. And I think it's just exemplary and hardly ever been bettered. It's a perfect pitch of, like, the game is hard. Like, you will die quite easily if you're not careful. But every enemy has their own little behavior that you can exploit and learn, and every weapon has its use, and everything is there for you to become a master of it. But it's entirely on the player,
Like, how did you find at the same time the puzzles? Because that's another core principle of the series that's well known for being notoriously difficult.
Yes. See, this is the thing. I'm not exactly a puzzle guy, let's say.
Oh,
which is funny because the first game, Flock, that I was actually had any real input on was a puzzle game, and it's also ridiculously hard. I find it very difficult. And Zelda, So Zelda 3, I was sort of refreshing my memory of a couple of the dungeons and things, and this was a game that, it was very early in the SNES's life, wasn't it? It was sort of the second year it was out or something.
Yeah, more or less.
And so this game started on the NES as well. Like, it was actually sort of brought up to the SNES because they were so excited by the power. But gamers in general, or games rather, had not been terribly complex up to that point. They were exciting and they were fun and absorbing, and maybe on PC it was a slightly different story. But we're still so early in sort of video games, in inverted commas, that the fact that Zelda 3 introduced multi-layered dungeons, so you have floors that you progress down on some of the dungeons. You just go, right, you get to the bottom, each floor is like a set of puzzles interconnected, and eventually you get down to the next floor, and then the bottom there's a boss. And obviously then they start mixing it up, so you sort of have to go down a bit to trigger something to go back up a bit. And then later on in the game, there are ones where you literally have to drop through the floor to the room below you, which you have to basically have memorized, or maybe you haven't seen yet, so you have to sort of take a leap of faith. And the idea of demanding of a player that they visualize in 3D, essentially, using a 2D game, but visualize a 3D space that is a puzzle that interlocks, that's something that not only hadn't really been done that much up until that point, like, they did it so well, it's still got its sort of rough edges. Sometimes it's a bit brutal, or you kind of think, how on earth was I supposed to figure that out, but there are usually enough hints, and they clearly play tested it a lot. But for them to just kind of come out the gate with that stuff, just go bam, here's a new template for an adventure game. Here's like a great way to sort of help the player progress through it and feel like they're mastering it, and these 3D dungeons, but using 2D planes was quite amazing. Not to mention the light and dark world. They literally have, like, it's not even just a palette swap. A lot of it is like architecturally a palette swap, but you transfer between these two versions of the overworld and some of the dungeons as well, almost. And you're sort of emptying water from lakes and draining places, and it's just you're thinking on so many levels at once that the puzzles were, whilst brutal, they were incredibly satisfying to to complete.
Let's mention how A Link to the Past was kind of massive change from the first two games in terms of camera perspective. Normally this isn't normally an important point for most games, but like for Zelda, at least in the early days, and it was a big talking point, or a big major changing point, because like the first two were kind of side scrolling, whereas this one was overhead.
Well, yeah, the first one was sort of a very rudimentary overhead. But it didn't matter that, whether it was side scrolling or not. It was actually the second one that introduced explicitly side scrolling bits. But yeah, like the two are so very, very close together. It's easily confused. But yeah, and it's interesting that they dropped it. I mean, it's odd because you'd think so. Obviously, I would think as someone who has made games and understands a little bit about why features get cut. Even at Nintendo, they don't have infinite time and money, and so to create a side-scrolling element, you would not necessarily need a lot of new character art because the characters are sort of side-on anyway. But with the environment art and things like that, and behaviors and gameplay would change on a side-scrolling thing. So when you're going from Zelda 1 to 2 on the same machine, essentially the same graphics, essentially the same engine, that's a fairly cheap risk to take. It's something that, well, you're kind of just making the game again for the sequel, but you're adding one new sort of significant thing, which was the side scrolling. In the transition to 3, new hardware, expansive game world, and they were like, do you know what? I can imagine them just going, let's not even approach the side on bit. That is another big risk over and above just having to make all of this. To the power of the SNES to sort of do justice. And then they didn't make another 2D one. They sort of did they did on the Game Boy, but it's not a continuation on the hardware. And there was a Satellaview sort of side story / sequel, which was only in Japan. But the next actual true Zelda entry was on the N64. So at which point they didn't need to make a distinction between overhead and side-on, the idea of adventuring. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so the camera could go wherever they want, and from an experience point of view, if you want to make a side-scrolling bit and a top-down game, I imagine it's because top-down is sort of exploration and side-on is sort of combat. That's sort of the split. It's a bit more sort of action, you kind of a bit more zoomed in or whatever. Yeah, and in 3D, you don't need to do that. It's all seamless. So we never saw maybe what you could imagine, a Zelda 4 on the SNES might have been if they'd have introduced these side-on sections again, or whether all of this, speculation is actually just rubbish and they just thought it was crap side-on, so they didn't bother. We'll never know.
No, I guess not. You touched upon it just a couple of months ago, but A Link to the Past also introduced a kind of series staple. The parallel worlds.
Yes.
How did you feel of that?
I mean, so from when you're playing through it, it's kind of an odd one. The whole, you can kind of see the extent of the whole map as soon as you've basically started the game up. There's nothing to sort of block you off. You can almost explore all of the overworld, but none of the dungeons and the sort of bits and bobs that are sort of blocked off by item requirements. So you have an idea of how big this game's going to be, and you're playing through it. And the structure is essentially there are three bosses to kill, 3 dungeons for each, a dungeon for each of them. Sorry, and you get a pendant. And then the idea is when you've got all these 3 pendants, you power up your sword enough, like it imbues it. I think you have to go and find the sword at that point as well, and then you fight the sort of, in inverted commas, the big bad, the boss of the game. And it's not a small amount of gameplay. If you're doing everything, you could spend a good sort of 4 or 5 hours through to that point. And then you beat him, and you're like, yeah, well, obviously, you're kind of expecting it to be over. But then there is a sort of nagging feeling of, well, there's a lot of map I haven't seen. There's a lot of things that seem interesting that I haven't explored. And of course, the game goes, haha, that wasn't actually the end. And there are 7 more dungeons, and a dark version of this white world that you've been inhabiting. And it just blows your mind. You're just not expecting it. It's an absolutely incredible moment. And So, you just think, what on earth? Your mind can't grasp how much more adventuring there is to do. It seems infinite. And the game essentially lets you swap between the two at whim. There are certain points at which you can do it. Also, there's an item that lets you do it a bit more often. And I mean, from a sort of design point of view, it's just a really clever way of expanding the game. So it essentially makes the whole overworld map another dungeon. One that you have to kind of manipulate on two sort of realities, and they sort of interact. And nothing in that is particularly, I would say, challenging. Once you've figured it out, it's just it's more the realization of what you have to do rather than the doing of it that's the challenge. But it just in a game that's all about high adventure and just sort of a young boy going off to sort of do what he can to save the world. It's just this absolutely incredible thing, and stylistically, it's a very strange place, the Dark World. Very weird indeed.
Link to the Past is also a first for the series in terms of establishing a backstory for Ganon. What did you think of Ganon, or who we would become to know as Ganondorf later down the line?
Well, it's funny, isn't it? Yeah, this is the first time they say that he's like the king of the thieves. Not the Prince of Thieves, that's Kevin Costner. He's the king of thieves. And yeah, I mean, he's presented as a big sort of pig demon when you finally see him. He's actually got, like, his alter ego is who you fight initially. He's a priest or a wizard called Aghanim. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but hey-ho. And yeah, he's this terrifying force. You actually only fight him properly right at the end, as they have done in subsequent games. There's sort of a final boss fight and then a final boss fight where it's even harder. But yeah, he's an interesting one. They in the Japanese original, it wasn't called A Link to the Past. It was called, I'm probably going to get this wrong. It was called The Triforce of the Gods. Yeah, and there were a lot more religious references. Obviously that was changed, the title. He was named a priest in the Japanese version, and he's a wizard in ours. And there's one of the first things you do is take Princess Zelda to the sanctuary, which was definitely modelled on a Christian church. It's got like stained glass windows, things like that. But apparently some of the text of the characters in that area has changed as well. But this idea that there's this whole backstory of an evil. I'm not sure it was Ganon, but there was an evil that they had to lock away behind the seals. These sages, magicians, sort of helped the kingdom, and then unfortunately Ganon broke the seal and used the Triforce for his own good, and it essentially grants you a wish for anyone who doesn't know. And so, if you're a bad person, obviously bad things happen. If you're a good person, like Link, good things happen. But yeah, it was you never really interact with him as a protagonist and an antagonist. There's never really any sort of clash in character or motivation beyond he's the bad guy, he's doing bad things, you got to stop him. But he's certainly, along with the Dark World version of Hyrule, he's very creepy. Like, he is a proper monster, and that's interesting. Nintendo's usually quite, it's all happy, but the Dark World, instead of stones on the floor, it's got skulls, and there are sort of mutated versions of all the characters, and people who are happy and talking in Kakariko Village in the Light World, they're like mute, or sad or destitute. Their houses are all ruined. It's I think it was followed on with Ocarina of Time very well. There's sort of the dark future in that. It's pretty brutal. Zombies roaming the streets, curses, people turned into spiders. It's all a bit grim.
Oh.
Yeah.
Don't talk to me about spiders. We'll touch upon other Zelda games in a bit, and after that, there's surely space in there for Majora's Mask, which is seemingly creepy enough as it is. But what else did you like about A Link to the Past?
I think the main thing, I sort of touched on it earlier, is the sense of adventure. And it can sort of be described, it's summarised by the opening sort of scene. this machine, as I said, it's a 16-bit machine. It's very limited. It was originally a game designed for the 8-bit NES. This was the first the first game, I think, on the SNES to use one of the slightly bigger cartridges. And when we say bigger, I think we mean a megabyte of memory rather than 512K or some. It's on that order of tiny. So with that in mind, the opening of the game, you're in bed, your uncle's in the room, and you're asleep, and you can hear someone talking to you, sort of saying, "Oh, they're in trouble, and the evil wizards plotting against the world, and you got to, do what you can to help." It's basically kind of a nightmare. Outside, there's rain pouring down, and your uncle gets up and says, "Wait here. I'm just going to take care of some business," essentially. And he picks up his sword and his shield and walks out. And then control is handed over to you. There's not a lot you can do except exit the door. And it's torrential rain outside, and it's cold and it's windy. And you follow the path around, and there's kind of your house is on the edge of some woods, and you don't have to go far to sort of to find the castle moat. There are guards about, and you sort of avoid them, and you come across a path that leads you to a secret entrance to the castle. And I mean, all of that, you look at a video of it now and you're like, well, it's actually pretty simple. There's like some repeating rain sprites, and there's like a nice atmospheric track, even though it is chiptune, tastic. It's all very rudimentary, but I don't know. It's something about that really spoke to me as a kid, and even now, like I describe it and I get the hairs on the back of my neck tingle, because, and this is the thing about all Zeldas, and all the games that a lot of the games that I really love. It's just that sense of like adventure and danger around the corner, but like that tingle of excitement of exploring, and I think, if I'm completely honest, it's because I grew up in the country. I used to genuinely run around with my friends, build forts in ditches. By forts, I mean, stuck a few twigs in the ground and called it a fort. We were very lucky to live in quite a rural area in a tiny village, so we kind of had the run of the fields. And this was a realization of what was going on in my head all those times we would run around chasing each other, but in a way that I could never have imagined. And it's sort of, it just makes me want to play it. Every time I think about that opening scene or see it on a video or play it, I'm like, right, that's me. I'm in for the whole adventure, and it is just magical. It's something that I've often been quoted as saying about video games, like, why do we make them? They're literally magic, they're ones and zeros, and there's code and art and design and intent, but it's essentially a magical thing. We are sort of presenting a fiction and a lie and an illusion to people, but we're asking them to buy into it, and that is, when they do, just the most magical thing in the world. And this is a distillation of that, and I think that is why a lot of people love Zelda so much, and why they keep going back to it, because it gets a lot of flack for not changing the template too much, but that template is a classic thing, I think it's up there with the fabled sort of 7 story types. There's the 7 story archetypes. It's like, you don't change an archetype, you don't change Zelda too much, otherwise it's not Zelda anymore, and then you don't want to play it. You might want to play it for another reason, but it's not, it's not the thing that you want. But I don't know, Nintendo might change it all and prove me wrong.
Don't fix what is broken.
Yeah, exactly. It's brilliant, and they nailed it the first time, and they've just iterated and made small improvements, and that's cool. I don't want them to sort of mess with it too much,
So what about the things you didn't like about A Link to the Past?
The biggest thing for me, I think, is related to what we were talking about right kind of near the start. This it's actually a difficult game, and they did a good job of making it sort of manageable and introducing skills and elements of gameplay and things like that. But good Lord, if you stop playing that game for a couple of days and you come back, you've got no idea what you're doing. There's a peculiarly sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of unsubtle and unrefined element of the game, which, when you get to the point beyond your first fight with the bad guy and you've uncovered the dark world, you've got 7, as I mentioned, you've got 7 dungeons to beat and bosses to fight. and you look on the overworld map, and they're literally labelled 1 to 7 where they are accessed on the map. You haven't got to find them. You haven't got to go over to that area and then bring that dungeon entrance onto the screen for it to appear. It's just literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 little flashing black on white number on a white circle. That's it. And I don't know. Part of me just thinks that was perhaps a late addition. The first 2 Zeldas were much less about hand-holding. They were much more, here is a world, you will figure it out. You will have a piece of paper next to you to map it out, and it's going to be tough. This was a step towards, Nintendo always say, like all of their employees are always saying, we never made games for hardcore or otherwise or casual or whatever. We just want to make games that as many people as possible can enjoy. And I think this was a step towards, making it a bit more friendly, but there's still that element of you go away and you come back and you're like, what the hell am I supposed to do? There's 7 sages to rescue? What? If there's it just seems a bit strange. So yeah, the idea you can get lost very, very, very easily, essentially in what you're supposed to do next. And I find that kind of, it's not unforgivable, and it's quite an intensive thing to try and overcome from a game design development point of view, especially in an open sort of a game with an overworld, and sort of you can't tackle them in any order. That's why they're numbered. But there is some freedom in which you approach them, and yeah, it's funny. I saying that though, I couldn't recommend them changing it, because part of the fun is, like I was saying, it's that exploration, that what's around the corner, and I found a door, I don't know what's through it, I'll go through it and find out, and there's a secret room or secret items or whatever. There's whole characters and sort of subplots almost that you could miss entirely if you just follow the main route through the game. So I'd rather they changed it rather than sort of tweak it rather than change it, if you know what I mean, because that risks sort of spoiling the game a little bit. And I mean, the other sort of thing is it's quite something that you wouldn't have thought would be a problem, but back in the day when they were making it, you've obviously got four directional movement in the original Zeldas. In this, you have 8, so you can move on the diagonals. And this, that was a big deal back then. And they hoped to have you able to shoot arrows and fight with your sword in 8 directions as well, but they couldn't do it. It's actually quite well. They could do it, but it was fiddly and not as fun as they'd hoped. So they basically limited it to 4 directions. But that's why they introduced the famous spin slash, the one that you can charge up and let go, so that you can actually attack enemies no matter where they are in relation to you, because they can all move in 8 directions as well. And it's a funny thing. It just, for some reason, it just bugs me that I can't stab my sword in 8 directions. Sometimes I just want to. But having understood the whys and the result, having this kick-ass move that maybe wouldn't have been in there if they hadn't had that trouble, I'm all right. I'll forgive them.
This question may be made a bit more redundant after what you just said, but as a developer, what design choices would you change or tweak about the game?
Oh man, you're asking me to pick apart my favourite game. I don't know if I can.
Well, that's your role as a developer. So.
It's very true, very true. I think that these days, if you were to make a game like this, it would be daft not to allow at least 8 directional control in terms of the combat. That is the one thing that I think, because I'm used to not having to worry about it, going back and worrying about it in that game is an issue. I understand all of the reasons that they didn't do it back then, but nowadays it just isn't a problem in the same way. That said, having cardinal directions, so the 8 specific directions you can attack in, there is that lends a precision to the way that you interact with the world, or 4 in Zelda 3. That having full analog, 360 degrees of freedom to attack and whatever, actually would take away from it. It would feel a little looser and a little sort of less kick-ass, frankly. So it's an interesting one. I think that I'm trying to think about sort of less tiny specific things. The as we mentioned earlier, the sort of lack of ability to sort of check where you're at and what you're supposed to be doing next is something that they've constantly tried to fix. I mean, even in the upcoming Majora's Mask on 3DS, they've added a journal function to the bomber. I can't remember the name of it. There's the bomber gang or something, and essentially that game plays with time travel as well. So it's important to know what you've done, where you need to be, and when. But something akin to that in a game like this wouldn't have gone amiss. I think either a journal sort of checking who you've been or who you've spoken to or where you've been, or even the ability to just mark things on a map and make notes. Although you can do that with pen and paper in the real world. So yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting question. I guess if I was being really, 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 really picky, I think some of the enemies are in there purely to add variety rather than necessarily be interesting bad guys to fight, if you know what I mean. So every time you go to a new area or a new dungeon, there are new bad guys, and I get that adds a sense of this world being huge and you constantly meeting new enemies and interesting things to overcome. But there comes a point where perhaps you just think, well, actually that guy's just a bit fiddly to fight, or this guy's annoying in a particular situation because of his AI routines or whatever weapons you've got, and perhaps they could have done a little bit more to trim some of those out, or combine some of the lesser enemies into simpler, more sort of fun bad guys to overcome. But that's pretty much it.
Moving on then to other Zelda games. How we should probably touch upon A Link Between Worlds, because that is more or less a direct sequel to A Link to the Past.
Yes.
How do you get on with that?
It's fantastic. Did you manage to play it?
I have not. No, sadly, no. But then I was distracted the year it came out with The Last of Us. So
fair dues. Yeah, that is a good game too. That is a fantastic game. I think they did an incredibly good job of sort of. So, I mean, I recently completed Zelda 3 for the first time, believe it or not, actually completed it 100% a couple of years back. So, I mean, up until that point, I'd constantly played up to a point, and it always seemed to be around. It was either just before or just after the final boss fight. I never really sort of went back and rinsed it for all it was worth. But recently I went back, and so it was fairly fresh in my mind, and having this 3DS version where the worlds come to life in sort of 3D, and it's a little faster, a little nippier. Some of the controls are just a little bit more fine-tuned, and the item progression was fixed. So rather than you going to I don't want to say fixed, but it was different. Rather than going to a dungeon, earning an item, and then mastering it within that dungeon, this one, the dungeons, you can access pretty much all of them from the start. But there's a guy with a shop who sells you the items, and you can either rent them for your life, as in until you are knocked unconscious, or you can just buy them if you've got enough rupees, which is the currency. And that was a really interesting sort of twist. It doesn't really change the core satisfaction of the game, getting an item and then figuring out all the cool ways you can interact with it. It just makes it feel a bit more free, a little less regimented in the way that it does that. And as a sort of reimagining of the world, because the map was almost identical, but they've sort of mixed up different characters and changed some of the interactions that you have, and the dungeons are all pretty much I think they're all 100% new, because some of the items are new as well. And it was just a brilliant way to sort of revisit something. So often you'll have a favorite game and you'll go back and play it and you think, ooh, for whatever reason, this isn't what I remember it to be. For me, Zelda 3, you go back and it's absolutely wonderful still. But this is, now I've got two to pick from. Essentially, this is like the Zelda 3 that was released in an alternate dimension in 1992, and it's somehow come through to us, so we get two goes at it. But yeah, it's an interesting one because they did make a lot of concessions to, I think, as I mentioned with the item structure, that is something that people have been critical about since Zelda 3, with Nintendo following that template, and they've shown that whilst they haven't changed it, a fairly simple sort of tweak makes it feel incredibly fresh. And I would not be surprised at all if they used that in the new the Wii U Zelda that they're working on. because it was incredibly successful.
So, what about the upcoming Majora's Mask then? Oh, well, not so much upcoming, but of course, it came out 15 years ago in Europe for the N64. Now coming out in a few weeks' time as of recording this, or by the time this comes out, it'll be about a month after it came out. So,
fantastic.
So we talked about the kind of creepy nature of Majora's Mask, but how did you find it?
Terrifying. There are occasional bits in it that are supposed to be scary, like the ghost sort of land and things like that. There's the desert area, I think, in particular, is all about death and stuff. And actually, again, Majora's Mask, funny story. I nearly got run over when I bought it. Because I was so excited, I walked straight out into the road looking at it rather than looking at the road. Anyway, I never finished it. I've got a history of doing this back when it came out. It was during my time at university, again in first year, funnily enough. And I played it, and I just didn't get on particularly well with the time travel technique. And then recently, it was out on the Wii. Was it Wii or Wii U eShop? I say recently, I mean like 2 years ago. And so I made the most of it. I was like, do you know what? That's on my list. I'm going to do it. And God, blimey, that game. Yeah, there's scary bits, but just generally the whole tone of it is so. Oh, I don't know. It's like a lucid dream, but like bits of it are like a nightmare. Just the laughing of the Skull Kid. He curses you, takes you through to a strange world. Like the whole idea of a Zelda game not set in Hyrule is weird enough. Like as I was saying, it's an archetype. It's kind of become like a fable or a legend that you constantly replay, and different things happen in each game. But they took you out of that familiarity. So from the word go, you're like, what is going to happen? I have no idea. And then you land and you're turned into this thing, this little Deku scrub thing, and you're like, well, that's not Link. I mean, that was more of a shock than when you play as Raiden in Metal Gear Solid 2. It's terrifying. And you've got no moves, like you kind of float about and stuff, and this guy's run off and he's stolen your horse. Like what on earth? I can't imagine anyone back in the day who was playing Majora's Mask hadn't played Ocarina of Time. And I mean, a lot of that game you get really fond of Epona, your horse. I mean, she's a great sort of character and tool in the game. But they do everything to pull the rug out from under your feet, and then you arrive in this town and you're like, well, obviously I'm going to save this world, but you're like, hang on, there's literally a moon with a giant evil face 3 days from smashing this world out of existence. You're like, how am I supposed to do that? Even if I power up, I'm not going to be able to duel it, am I? Like every other Zelda game, you get to the end and it's a monster that you can fight. How do you fight a moon? So just it's absolute, like basically genius, dark, twisted, evil genius.
Oh, I can only imagine. Are you going to pick it up for 3DS?
Oh, do you know, if I hadn't just finished it, then I absolutely would. I'm sort of in a position where making games takes up so much of my time. I've got this massive backlog, and I'm being very, very strict with myself. To the point where literally about 2 months ago, I started playing and finished playing Dishonored. I'm quite behind. So to replay something that I finished sort of relatively recently, I probably won't. But I'm very envious of anyone who is coming fresh to it, or who it's been a good few years, because it looks like they have made a lot of really smart little tweaks, to the systems to make it even better. And some of the stuff that you'll see in that game with the 3D ratcheted up is going to be quite something.
So what about the upcoming Wii U Zelda that we'll probably know more about come E3?
Yeah, I can't wait. It's always the series that I just like. That and Mario are just like, well, I know I'm buying it. If it's a new one, I'm buying it. That's the rule. But from what I've seen, it looks incredible, gorgeous. I love the sort of slight anime sort of styling to the graphics, sort of like a grown-up Wind Waker, isn't it? Almost.
No, it's actually more resembling Skyward Sword than it does Wind Waker, doesn't it?
I suppose it does, actually. I forget that Skyward Sword does actually have that lovely almost watercolor filter applied to the backgrounds and the way it renders things in the distance. But then, the up close stuff's got like slight toon rendering, hasn't it? That's a very good point. But it looks really great. It looks dynamic. very big, which is always good. And the way that they're talking about, the overworld being essentially one place, I think that people are misconstruing it, actually. Nintendo are very careful about what they say. And I've heard some people say, well, Zelda's always had an open world hub. And it's like, well, they haven't said hub. They've said it's an open world. So rather than going into a dungeon in it, be discrete from, essentially a level that you load from the overworld. I think they're all actually going to be intertwined in and exist in the world in a way that's actually slightly more meaningful. So that could be very exciting. I can't wait, frankly.
It's basically the Legend of Zelda Skyrim.
Yeah, which, who wouldn't want to play that, basically?
So, if I put it to you, what are your top 3 Zelda games?
So obviously Zelda 3 is at the top.
Of course.
I think I would have to put Skyward Sword at number 2.
Oh, really? Why?
Massive fan of that game. I just think that everything that they did that with the motion controls and the cool gadgets and stuff, using what is sensible about the Wii controls was very, very well done. I think as a story, it was one of the more interesting ones that they've done. It's sort of, spoiler alert, but it's sort of a prequel in terms of telling the story of kind of the origin of the Master Sword, depending on how you read it. And the bad guy was very, very cool. It's certainly, every time they sort of up the quality in terms of sort of production values, and that continued on with that game. It's absolutely fantastic. I think number 3. Oh boy! So I've never played the Game Boy one, and everyone tells me that that's amazing. By which I mean Link's Awakening, the original Game Boy one. But I'd have to go with either Ocarina of Time for number 3, or Zelda 4 Swords Adventures, but for wildly different reasons.
Okay. Go into why then.
Okay. So Ocarina of Time is, it's again, this generational leap to 3D, incredible realization of what everyone thought was the pinnacle of sort of 3D adventuring at the time. 2D adventuring with Zelda 3. Mature-ish storyline, some really dark moments in it, some wonderful characters, incredible gameplay, perfect camera system, everything about it pretty much was very, 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 very good. And when I got it, it was a Christmas game. Zelda always seems to be that for me. That's just like a happy time of the year, isn't it? So it holds a lot of memories for me, which are really nice. And it was first sort of world that I had thoroughly explored in 3D. Mario 64 was incredible for just showing a 3D world and going, oh my god, I can run around in it. It's a toy box. But this was an adventure in a world. You could do so much more. But then 4 Swords is just such a brilliant cooperative game. Running in around with 3 of your friends, all as Link, boomerangs going off. You've got fire that spreads around. You've got, hordes of bad guys. It's kind of like, it's almost like a Dynasty Warriors Zelda, which is funny because obviously they just recently did the actual Dynasty Warriors with Zelda. But yeah, it was just like a manic sort of arcade action version of Zelda, and I always do. I love arcade action games. Zelda's probably as close as I get to playing and really liking RPGs along the lines that most people think of them. Secret of Mana and Chrono Trigger are sort of outliers there, but for 2 very different reasons. Just those 2 games are absolutely fantastic. I think 4 Swords could have been anything, to be honest. So maybe it's a bit silly saying that it's a favourite Zelda game, because you could swap anyone in. It could have been an original IP. It could have been almost any game. The gameplay is very unrelated to Zelda, really, except in fairly superficial ways.
Honourable mentions. Hit it.
Right. Well, okay. Top of the list. I've got a list literally in front of me.
Yes, for what it's worth, Andrew sent me a ton of games when I first pitched them to come on, and it was a ton, and I had to force him to make a Sophie's Choice of sorts.
Difficult.
Between A Link to the Past and, what was it, GoldenEye? Yeah.
It was GoldenEye was the front runner, yeah. And even that was tied with about 8 other games. Oh man. So, all right, I'll start with GoldenEye because you mentioned it. That game, yeah. There is sort of a sort of a background and story to this, to why it sort of stuck with me for so long. But GoldenEye, when it came out, that was the game that I got my N64 for. And I mean, I loved the idea of Bond. I'd loved all of his old movies. I loved Rare's work up to that point. I hadn't played GoldenEye at that point, and I had not seen GoldenEye the movie, but I liked the idea of seeing it. Like, I just hadn't for whatever reason. And it got these amazing reviews, and I wanted an N64. So saved up, got one, and it just staggering, absolutely incredible game. Everything about it, from like, it's very, very economic with its storytelling, which is why it works or why it's labelled as a really great movie adaptation, because it doesn't really bother with the movie that much. It's not telling a story; it's actually just a series of really cool stuff to do as Bond. The gunplay was incredibly satisfying because of mainly because of A, the sound effects, and B, the way that bad guys reacted to you, which may or may not be related to the fact that originally it was an on-rails shooter, like a light gun game. And obviously that's the only thing you're doing is pointing at things and shooting them, so they have to react in interesting ways. And they had this whole system, obviously, where you shoot different bits of the body. They react differently. If you shoot them in the knee, then the shoulder, they'll go from grabbing the knee to the shoulder or at any point. You know, it's just incredibly satisfying. The fact that you could... I mean, I think... Am I right in saying it was Quake 1? Was sort of around the same time?
Quake 1 was 96. Like, we had...
So it would have been. Yeah, I think it would have been, yeah.
Yeah, because like I had Tom Bramwell on for the end of last season talking about Quake, and Quake was 96, yeah. So
yes.
GoldenEye was 97, wasn't it?
I think it was over here at least, yeah. So, I mean, like, comparatively, Quake, brilliant game. Not saying it's not. Wouldn't want to argue with Tom. But in terms of... You know, it does one thing very well: fast action. You know, fantastic. With GoldenEye, you get stuck on the first level. You find a gate across your path, and you're like, I don't understand. What am I supposed to do? And I think this is for people who were of an age at that time and of a games playing sort of level of experience. It was kind of a watershed moment. You can shoot the lock off the gate. It's not just a graphic, and it sounds like the most incidental thing. And it shouldn't have any kind of impact, or there shouldn't be a memory associated with it. But so few games actually had a level of fidelity that you're shown a door and you can go through it. It's not just something on a wall that you can't, you know. You're shown a window, it will break when you smash it. You know, these levels were, as far as, you know, for the time, were basically as close to real as they could be. And the fact that, I mean, that was very simple. You know, you can't get past here unless you do this, you know, unless you figure out you have to shoot the lock off. And it's in the movie. He does it in the movie, you know, so, you know, you should know. Although I didn't, because I hadn't seen it. But it's sort of indicative of the level of sort of interweaving gameplay objectives and like level design and systems that all of the levels allowed you. So you play through it on the easiest setting, and you just have to get to the end of the level, and that's it. You go on Secret Agent, and there's like a couple of side objectives that you're like, oh, this makes me go to different areas of the level that I didn't even know existed, or a door was actually locked, and that would, you know, a security door that was open on easy isn't, and you have to find the guy and get his card. And then on Perfect Agent, it just gets, it's even more crazy. And it was one of the first games to really allow that sort of, it's not really expression of the player's sort of intent through the gameplay, but it was more than a lot of games had. You know, it wasn't up with Deus Ex. That was a good few years later, but the idea that you could approach the game in multiple different ways, and you were allowed to think of the levels as real spaces, and that you would think, well, there must be a way around there. Like, this can't be the only way, you know. And it wasn't, you know, if you thought that. It was absolutely fantastic. Incredibly hard, but absolutely fantastic. And I got it at a time when at school I was not having a good time, shall we say. I don't know if you know about Shahid Ahmed's Beyond the Final Boss website.
I do know of it.
Yeah, so I did a piece on there which kind of is related to this. I was bullied quite nastily at school for a year or so, and this came at a point where that was going on. I was not having a very nice time, but I was able to essentially, let's make light of it, essentially by kicking everyone's butt in multiplayer, actually sort of restore some semblance of pride in myself and my abilities as a human being. So that was kind of cool. I mean, it's more complex than that, but we haven't got forever. And that's actually, speaking of Game City earlier, I was very lucky. I was on a panel with Martin Hollis, who was the lead designer on GoldenEye, and I think Perfect Dark as well after it. And I was able to tell him that in a much shorter version, and that meant a lot. That I was able to sort of, I loved the game. I would have anyway, but it actually genuinely helped me through a time that I really needed something. And in a way, GoldenEye is not a kind of game that has much emotional resonance. You wouldn't think it would be capable of that, but it meant a lot to me. And it still reminds me of how powerful games can be. They are absolutely wonderful things. So that was why that was nearly the game I was talking about. Donkey Kong Country, the first game I got on my SNES, it marked the time that I was sort of growing up into video games from the Commodore 64. As you can imagine, that was a bit of a leap into the Donkey Kong Country series on the SNES. Looked astounding, sounded amazing. I still love the way it plays. Its levels are built a bit more like an adventure game than a pure platformer like Mario or something like that. And as I said previously with Zelda, I love sort of adventuring and exploring as much as I do anything else. Related to that, Half-Life 1, as I mentioned, means a lot to me in my career particularly. But it was the first game that really that was the next step from GoldenEye for me. That was like, wow, this is a real world, and it's an amazing story that I've never heard before, and I'm living through it, and all this wonderful things that everyone knows why Half-Life 1's great. Super Mario World is just the pinnacle of the genre. Secret of Mana is probably my favourite Japanese RPG. Again, a game that I bought not knowing much about it when I had my SNES. I'd saved up for... This was the strangest thing. I'd seen coverage of it, and I was sort of umming and ahhing, and then I forgot about it. And then I went to a shop, it was called Special Reserve. You had to be a member, and you got massive discounts with my dad. And I was sort of wondering, like, I've saved up money for a SNES game, but I don't know what I'm going to get, but I've gone to the shop anyway. Like, that's a weird thing, I think. I don't know how many people do that, you tend to know what you want to buy when you buy it. And Secret of Mana was on the shelf, and purely on the box art, I asked one of the staff, what is that? Is it any good? And they said, I can't tell you, but yes, like, I'm not allowed. My job doesn't allow me to recommend games, but yes, you should get that. So I did, and then from the moment the whale song sort of musical intro hits, it just had me under a spell. It's absolutely incredible game. It's an action RPG for people who want to know and should go and play it. It's absolutely magical. What else? Mario 64 I've covered as well. Just a watershed moment. And then three non-Nintendo ones. How about that? Sega Rally Championship. And I mean specifically
Rally. I used to play that game, the arcade version, like bad, like a lot.
It's so good. That game, like, I think it's the sound effects. I've thought about it a lot, and I think it's the sound effects. I mean, obviously the course design's great, but the sort of the amount of tactile response you got before rumble packs, before any of that stuff. The graphics are pretty ropey. But you seem to just understand how your tyres were interacting with the courses in that game, and it was the first course. Was it desert? It was desert.
No, it was.
That was it for me. I didn't play anything else.
Oh.
I mean, I know there was forest and mountain.
I always thought forest was the first one, the first stage.
Oh, maybe it is forest.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so it's stage one, whatever it's called. It's got that massive, like, drifting corner right at the end, and you've got. Oh, it's just incredible. That game, I again passed the pad. Me and my friend a different friend this time, used to literally spend all day just trying to beat each other's time trials on that with the Toyota Corolla. Just fantastic game. Rez, that was Tetsuya Mitsuguchi Sega Rally. So is Rez. That game, I've never really been into any kind of drugs or anything, but that game got me as close as I need to be. I think it's probably the best high you could ever have anyway. Something about it I don't know. I didn't know much about it, and I had a bit of a history of trying to get it to work on my Dreamcast. I bought 5 copies from Game, and none of them worked on my Dreamcast. It doesn't make any sense. So I had to get it on PS2 like a year later, and it's just absolutely incredible. It's an on-rail shooter where you go through sort of a corrupted computer system, sort of virtual reality in the worst kind of 90s way, but in a very cool Japanese game development presentation, and the whole world, the audio and the visuals all pulse in time to the music, and it's based on the works of Kandinsky, I believe, who had synesthesia. He could visualize sounds as pictures, and it's a kind of a medical condition, but it's one that actually sounds kind of cool, judging by Rez. But anyway, and then Resident Evil 4, which is just about, I think in the last 10 years, it's probably the game that I have played the most times from start to finish. So GameCube, got it on import, absolutely amazing. Played it a few times through on that, and then it came out on the Wii. And I don't know have you ever played the Wii version?
I've not played the Wii version. I've played the PS2 version though.
Okay, yeah. See, the Wii one, for some reason, that sort of the tank movement of the character Leon, and the pointer, using that as aiming, it's the perfect control system for that game. It's such a shame that I think, it's kind of people who were already over it by the time it came to the Wii. But me and my 2 flatmates up in Dundee, we all bought it separately, even though we could have just bought it once and just all sat there playing it over and over and over in our different rooms, shouting out stuff, and competing and all kinds of silly stuff. But that game is Shinji Mikami's best, and I just think as an action game has rarely been. I don't think it's been equaled. Frankly, it's like its individual mechanics have been aped and have been done as well, but it's something about the pacing and the game as a whole, the stylistic touches, like the shopkeeper and his weird. What is it? He's sort of a cockney, isn't he? Yeah. What are you buying?
Yeah.
I thought I was in sort of some weird bit of Spain where demons have taken over, but apparently not. And he was a bit of a demon. He had claws and glowy eyes, and I don't know. There's just so much about that game. Again, I could have chosen that one perhaps, but that game's just that sort of. A lot of the games on this list, they have an emotional sort of tangent to them, or they're a point with Mario 64 where it was just I did not know this was possible in games. Oh my god. But Resi 4, I was used to all of that. Resi 4 is just an absolutely brilliant action game on every level, and so it is something that it's probably the more sort of dry inclusion, if you like, but it's one that just I couldn't talk about my favourite games without mentioning that game. It's just absolutely brilliant.
If I put you on the spot and said, what are your top 3 games ever? What would you obviously, Link to the Past would be top, but
obviously, Link to the Past. I think Super Mario World probably has to be in there. It's just so good. And again, that's a Mario game that was more of the levels are obviously platforming challenges, but it's got an overworld and there are secrets and items that you can use and power ups and stuff, and it's sort of an adventure, isn't it? There's an element again. So it's funny having made this list. I'm like, I can see a running theme along these. And I think GoldenEye, I think it kind of has to be. I've realised I've left Metroid, either Super or Prime, off of this list. But I can't go on forever.
You've left off Metal Gear Solid as well.
That too. See, Metal Gear Solid is, again, that's something. I love Twin Snakes. I don't know many people who do, but I love Twin Snakes. But Metal Gear Solid, genuinely, that was a not in terms of I enjoyed playing it, but it was the first game where I gave a crap about any of the characters. Genuinely, that is an important game for me. There's just too many. I think if you had to press me, it would have to be Link to the Past, Super Mario World, and GoldenEye. But ask me in 6 months, and 1 or 2 of those could easily be swapped in or out.
1981. Evil dictators, aliens, and mindless criminals threaten to turn the world upside down. You wouldn't want it any other way. Spilt Milk Studios and Mastertronic presents Tango Fiesta. The Mac and Cheese, Hong Kong 83, the Steel Auger, the Hong Kong 84, the Matrix 80, the Viper Combat Rifle, the Woodstock 69, the Cobra Cleaner. Splash your cash in the gun shop. I'd buy that for $1.
Tango Fiesta. For those who don't know what Tango Fiesta is, give us the elevator pitch of what is Tango Fiesta.
All right, it's a top-down 4-player cooperative action game. It's arcadey, it's fun, it's you versus the world, and we like to think that it's also kind of it's the true story behind every single over-the-top 80s action movie you've ever loved. So we kind of wrote the game believing that Die Hard, Predator,
Rambo,
Commando, RoboCop, Terminator. All of these films, that as we know them, are actually based on true stories, and not true stories, but one true story. They all actually happen to this one unfortunate, amazing hero called John Strong. And he's the main character of our game, Tango Fiesta, and we basically follow his adventures. And he travels through time and he fights aliens and ghosts and gets double crossed and all kinds of exciting things. Blows an awful lot of bad guys up, and then at the end, when he returns to his own time, obviously no one believes him because that's crazy. Like, that doesn't make any sense. That can't happen. But of course, Hollywood, smelling money, they diddled him out of all his stories, and he never got any credit. So this is his chance for the truth to be told.
You mentioned a game from your childhood that more or less resembles those kind of 80 movies, Cabal. Like, was that a bigger inspiration as well?
It's funny. It isn't specifically, not in terms of the gameplay, but looking back to what it was trying to do. Although, I mean, with Cabal, I think they were literally just, I wish we had the Rambo license. You know, they literally made Rambo, but without calling it Rambo. We've gone for more of a, hey, all that stuff exists, it's wonderful, it's its own thing, but this is like our love letter to it, you know. So in that sort of same way, we're kind of just paying homage to some things that we think are absolutely amazing, and that happens to be, you know, the action movies of the 80s. Arnie and Bruce Willis and Sly, the whole lot of them. They're just fantastic.
Like, what other influences was there besides the typical 80s action movie?
So, in terms of sort of gameplay, we've gone for a currently very trendy sort of what's the word? Automatic, procedurally generated levels, and it's not necessarily because we want it to be the new Binding of Isaac and people are like doing all these crazy runs and customizing their characters and all this kind of stuff. We just want it to be new and interesting every time, you know. And we kind of use the excuse that he's telling his story from memory, and his memory's not all what it used to be. So the sort of the levels every time you play World 1-1, it's still got the same bad guys. And the same sort of level structure. It's just laid out differently and, you know, like a different shape, and it might mix up the objectives a little bit and things like that. So it's just a way for it to have longer legs. You know, I think if we just made a series of levels by hand, it wouldn't be as sort of fun over the long term. Especially it's a co-op game, you know, primarily. That's how we've designed it. Four Swords Adventures, funnily enough, is a sort of a touchstone in that sort of madcap. Kind of 4 players having a lot of fun together, running around top down, tons of bad guys, lots of things going on, kind of a way. Gauntlet was a bit of a touchstone as well. There was a time when we sort of thought it's Gauntlet with guns. So again, you're just sort of running around levels that are quite not short. I don't want to undersell it, but you know, they're self-contained and they're full of bad guys, and you just have to kind of spray and pray a lot, because you know that's what they did in the 80s movies. You know, no one ever aimed a gun in the 80s. Like, you know, bad guys aimed guns in the 80s. That's why they lost. I mean, we go a bit further than that as well. We sort of reference 80s culture, not just the movies. You know, the music, the people, the fashion. all of that kind of stuff. And we've had a lot of fun doing it. I've basically spent the last year with 3 of my mates living in the 80s and making a game. I guess you could say that basically it's an arcade game from back then, but made to today's standards. You know, it's simple and over the top, but it's fast and fun and exciting, and you know, hopefully has a lot more content than some of those arcade games did.
So it's been on Steam Early Access for a while, hasn't it?
It has, yeah. It was since April, actually, last year. So, yeah.
Yeah. How have you found that experience on Steam?
Been really interesting. I'll start with the downside. Almost, it can be perfectly summarised by the fact that the day that we launched, and I wish I was joking, but literally the day that we launched on the Early Access, Valve sent an email round to the internet saying, hey, this Early Access thing that we've been pushing, you know, it's all good, it's great, it's wonderful, but you might want to be careful because a lot of the games that are coming out on it are pretty ropey. That wasn't, you know, word for word, but it was basically what they said. And we were like, oh, great. So we're announcing Early Access the day that they're selling people to be careful of Early Access. So that was interesting. It's impossible to tell if that had an effect or not, but it's been a little slower than I would have hoped. We've learnt an awful lot. The game is so much better for being on Early Access. We've got like a very small but very excitable bunch of fans lurking on the forums. They consume every update and send us videos and screenshots of what's wrong. And even though that might sound a bit like a bit of a pain, it's actually perfect. That's what we want to happen. And we are not far from like version 1 from being finished, but as with most things in life, we don't know how long it's going to take. So we're just gonna keep making it better until it's good enough to call complete. It's exciting. I mean, I think we're one of the few indie games to actually have fully functional online multiplayer. You know, a lot of games have couch co-op, as they call it these days, but we've been out of the gate with online. We think it's really important. The game's great in single player, but it's always better with friends. We thought, well, it would be, no matter what the cost is to development or whatever, you know, we felt that you're kind of you're not doing it justice, you know, if you don't let people play it online as well as off. So,
sometime this year on PC, final finished version?
Yep, absolutely. And Mac and Linux, should everything go according to plan.
And consoles? I mean, like, you and Shahid are very close, so PS4 early? Vita?
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, who knows? We have, without sort of naming names, we've spoken to the platform holders, plural, and you know, we've made sure that, you know, they're happy with it coming, and they are. So we just need to finish the game, and then at that point we will, we'll. Essentially, what happens is you have to figure out how much it's going to cost or how long it's going to take, which is often the same thing. So it's best done when we're finished, because then we'll know exactly how much there is to port over. But we've made it in Unity; it shouldn't be too much of a struggle. We've got like really good connections with the industry in the UK. And I'm very much looking forward to playing it on my PS4 or my Xbox One or whatever in the hopefully this year. Who knows? That would be great, wouldn't it?
Tango Fiesta! Let off on Steam!
So on Twitter, I am at Spilt Milk Studio. That doesn't have an S on the end because there isn't enough room, sadly. And tangofiesta.co.uk, Facebook /Spilt Milk Studios with an S because there is room. And check us out. Early Access, got the trailers up there as well. I think we're $10, whatever that is, $11.99. On Early Access, and I do believe if this doesn't jinx it, we're going to be updating the week that we're recording this. But by the time this is out, the game might be finished. Holy crap!
Ooh!
Yeah, you never know. You never know. And even if it isn't, go and buy it and play it with us because it's great.
On that bombshell. thanks for listening to my favourite game. Next week, Rhea Jenkins on Bayonetta. Until next week, bye bye.